Welcome to Starlight Sci-Fi, your destination for thrilling science fiction stories. Hit that subscribe button, and let's dive into the stars. Imagine waking up after 1,000 years of slumber, only to find that humanity, every trace of it, had vanished. No bustling cities, no laughter, no whispers of life. Just silence, and a mystery waiting to be unraveled. The hiss of pressurized air jolted Elias awake. For a moment he was disoriented, his mind struggling to piece together fragmented thoughts. The sensation of cold lingered in his limbs, and his chest rose and fell with slow, shallow breaths. He blinked, his vision adjusting to the dim, flickering lights above. The pod's interior was cramped, with frost clinging to its glass surface. He ran a trembling hand over his face and focused on the faint glow of the control panel. Numbers and symbols flashed before his eyes, and a single, chilling realization gripped him. He had been asleep for 1,000 years. His memories surfaced in fragments. He was part of the Cryosleep initiative, a program designed to preserve humanity's brightest minds for the future. He remembered entering the pod with optimism, believing he'd awaken to a better world, a thriving Earth, where humanity had solved its crises and reached new heights. But something was wrong. He sat up slowly, his muscles aching from centuries of stillness. The air was stale, carrying a metallic tang that scraped at his senses. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of ancient machinery struggling to stay functional. Rows of identical pods lined the walls, their surfaces thick with dust. He stumbled to his feet and moved toward the nearest one, wiping away the grime to peer inside. It was empty. So was the next pod, and the one after that. Panic clawed at his chest as he staggered from pod to pod, desperate to find another occupant. But the silence remained unbroken. His heart sank. Where were the others? The chamber's exit loomed ahead, its sliding door slightly ajar. Beyond it, faint light flickered, beckoning him forward. He stepped through cautiously, his bare feet crunching against cracked tiles. The corridor was a ruin of rusted panels and broken screens. The walls, once pristine, were marred by deep cracks and faded symbols of the organization that had orchestrated the Cryosleep project. The facility's main control room lay just ahead. Elias pushed through another set of doors, which groaned loudly in protest. The sight that greeted him sent a chill down his spine. The control room was in disarray. Terminals hung limply from their mounts, cables snaking across the floor like mechanical vines. Dust coated every surface, and jagged holes punctured the walls, revealing glimpses of the outside world. Through a shattered window, he saw the remnants of a once thriving city. Skyscrapers had crumbled into skeletal ruins, their twisted forms casting long shadows under a sickly green sky. Bridges lay in pieces, highways had been overtaken by cracks, and an unnatural stillness blanketed the landscape. Elias pressed his hands against the broken glass, staring out at the desolation. His breath fogged the surface as the weight of the scene settled on him. This wasn't the future he had been promised. Humanity's triumphant legacy, the hope he had clung to in his slumber, was nowhere to be found. Silence surrounded him, broken only by the faint creak of metal in the wind. For the first time, the thought struck him, I may be the last. Elias descended from the facility into a city that had once been a beacon of human innovation and progress. Now, it was a skeleton of its former self. The streets were littered with fragments of the past, abandoned vehicles covered in layers of dust, shattered storefronts with faded signs advertising goods no longer needed, and fragments of infrastructure reduced to rubble. The silence was suffocating. Not a single bird chirped, no insects buzzed, and not even the wind whispered through the ruins. It was as if the world had been placed on mute. The stillness unnerved him, and every footstep he took echoed unnaturally, amplifying the sense of isolation. He wandered aimlessly at first, trying to make sense of his surroundings. His gaze darted between the hollowed-out shells of skyscrapers, their glass long shattered, leaving only jagged remnants that reflected the sickly green sky. What had caused such devastation? Had humanity done this to itself, or had something else intervened? The first sign of humanity's disappearance lay in the vehicles. Rows of cars, buses, and trucks were frozen in time, as if their occupants had vanished mid-commute. Doors hung open, belongings spilled onto the pavement, bags, shoes, even toys, as though people had simply disappeared into thin air. It was eerie, and Elias's mind raced with questions. He passed a park overtaken by decay. Rusted swings hung limp, their chains creaking in the faintest breeze. A carousel sat idle, its vibrant colors faded and peeling. The remnants of life were everywhere, yet no life remained to claim them. It was as though the city itself had been abandoned in a single, catastrophic moment. Elias's instincts told him to keep moving. He needed answers, but where to look? The sprawling urban wasteland offered no immediate clues. He focused on finding something, anything, that might provide a record of what had transpired. His eyes landed on a crumbled library, its facade partially collapsed, but its entrance still accessible. Inside, the air was heavy with dust, and the shelves were toppled like dominoes. Books lay scattered across the floor, their pages yellowed and brittle with age. Elias sifted through them, hoping to find a history book, a journal, anything that could tell him what had happened, but the decay of time had erased most of the words. He moved deeper into the city, eventually stumbling upon a terminal embedded in the wall of a decrepit government building. Against all odds, it powered on when he touched it, the screen flickering weakly. The interface was ancient but functional, and he accessed the city's archives. What he found chilled him to his core. The last entries dated back almost 1,000 years and spoke of strange occurrences. Reports of lights in the sky, mass disappearances, and global communications failing. The final log was brief but haunting. They are coming. We couldn't stop them. We are lost. The terminal screen flickered and died, plunging Elias into darkness once again. He stood there, frozen, as the weight of the message settled over him. The realization hit like a physical blow. This wasn't just an empty city. This was a tomb, a graveyard for an entire civilization that had been wiped from existence. Elias stepped back into the streets, his mind racing. He had hoped to find survivors, but it was becoming increasingly clear that he might be the only one left. Whatever had happened to humanity had been sudden, catastrophic, and complete. As he wandered further into the city, a thought began to gnaw at the edges of his mind. What if whatever had caused this destruction was still out there, watching, waiting? The silence of the city now felt oppressive, as if it wasn't just the absence of life, but the presence of something else, something unseen. Elias pressed onward, his sense of purpose sharpened by dread. He wasn't just searching for answers now, he was searching for a way to survive in a world that had forgotten humanity entirely. The city's ruins stretched endlessly before Elias, each step taking him deeper into the haunting desolation. He walked until the crumbled buildings began to thin, replaced by jagged expanses of cracked earth. The air felt heavier here, charged with a subtle vibration that made his skin crawl. In the distance, something caught his eye, a black structure piercing the horizon, smooth and sharp against the jagged wasteland. It stood unnaturally tall, dwarfing the remnants of humanity's creations, its surface gleaming as if untouched by time. It was a monolith, and it didn't belong here. Curiosity, mixed with an uneasy sense of dread, drove Elias forward. The closer he got, the more unnatural the structure appeared. Unlike the ruins around it, the monolith showed no signs of decay. Its edges were impossibly sharp, its surface reflecting the eerie green light of the sky in ways that seemed to shift and shimmer. Reaching its base, Elias hesitated. Up close, the monolith radiated a faint hum that he could feel in his bones. Strange symbols covered its surface, glowing faintly, their shapes alien and incomprehensible. They pulsed rhythmically, as though alive, and the vibrations seemed to sync with his heartbeat. Cautiously, he placed his hand against the monolith. The instant his skin made contact, the hum intensified, and the symbols flared to life. Light erupted from its surface, forming a holographic display that hovered in the air before him. The display was a cascade of alien symbols and diagrams. Lines of text, charts, and images flickered rapidly, their meaning just out of reach. But some of it was unmistakable Earth. Its familiar shape appeared in holographic form, rotating slowly, surrounded by strange markings. Elias watched, mesmerized, as the display shifted, showing images of cities burning, landscapes dissolving into ash, and the Earth's surface blanketed by an unnatural darkness. Then came the stars. The projection zoomed out, showing Earth from space, its orbit dotted with ships, alien vessels, sleek and black, with angular designs that mirrored the monolith itself. His breath caught as the next images unfolded, the ships descending, weapons activating, and the surface of the planet being scoured. Entire regions vanished in pulses of light, their destruction systematic and unrelenting. Humanity had fought back. He saw their fleets rise to meet the invaders, their cities bristling with defenses, but it hadn't been enough. The invaders' technology was beyond comprehension, their assault devastatingly precise. The hologram shifted again, this time showing a timeline. The symbols pulsed like a countdown, each one marking an event. Elias couldn't decipher the exact meaning, but the implications were clear. This wasn't just a monument, it was a record. The monolith was preserving the story of humanity's fall, as though cataloging an extinct species. But the monolith wasn't just a passive recorder. It began to hum louder, its light intensifying. Elias took a step back as he felt a shift in the air. The ground beneath him vibrated, and the sky above seemed to ripple faintly. He realized too late what was happening. The monolith wasn't just a relic of the past, it was a beacon. His activation of it had sent a signal, a pulse stretching out into the cosmos. It was calling something. Elias's stomach churned as the thought crystallized in his mind. The invaders hadn't left completely. They were waiting, watching. And now they knew someone was here. The realization spurred him into action. He backed away from the monolith, his eyes darting to the horizon, half expecting to see the alien ships descending already. The monolith continued to hum, its light pulsing brighter with each second. Elias turned and ran, his thoughts racing. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he had to get away from the monolith. Whatever he had awakened, it wasn't friendly, and it wasn't going to stop. Elias ran until his lungs burned, putting as much distance as possible between himself and the monolith. Its eerie hum faded into the background, but the unease it had planted in his mind stayed with him. What had he activated? What kind of signal had it sent, and who or what was out there to receive it? After hours of wandering through the wasteland, he came across another structure. This one was more familiar, though still in ruins. It looked like a research facility, partially collapsed and half buried under centuries of dirt and debris. A faded logo near the entrance caught his eye, one that he faintly remembered from his time before Cryosleep. This had been a center of innovation, a hub for Earth's brightest minds. If there were any answers left, they might be here. Elias forced his way inside, the metal doors grinding reluctantly against the debris. The interior was in shambles, collapsed walls, broken consoles, and shattered screens. But there was power here, faint and intermittent, as if the building itself clung to life. He ventured deeper, past rusted machinery and abandoned workstations. Eventually, he reached a central control room, its main console miraculously intact. The screen flickered weakly as he pressed a button, and to his astonishment, it booted up. The interface was ancient but functional. Elias sifted through layers of corrupted files, bypassing error messages and dead links until he found what he was looking for: a cache of preserved records. His heart pounded as he opened the first file. The video feed was grainy, but the message was clear. It showed a scientist, her face pale and lined with fear, speaking directly into the camera. "If you're seeing this," she said, her voice cracking, "then humanity is gone." The feed cut to a series of clips, each more horrifying than the last. First, the lights in the sky, strange, silent ships descending through the atmosphere, their sleek forms blotting out the sun. Then came the disappearances. Entire cities went dark overnight, their populations vanishing without a trace. Humanity had tried to fight back. The archives showed desperate attempts to repel the invaders' military strikes, orbital defenses, even experimental technologies that pushed the boundaries of human understanding. But nothing worked. The alien technology was incomprehensibly advanced, their weapons precise and devastating. Elias's hands trembled as he watched the final clips. The invaders had released a biotechnological weapon, an airborne agent that dissolved organic matter on a molecular level. Plants, animals, and humans were eradicated, leaving behind only lifeless shells of buildings and infrastructure. The records weren't just a chronicle of destruction. They also held fragments of hope. In the chaos, humanity had launched what the files called the Ark's massive ships designed to carry the remnants of civilization into the stars. Genetic samples, cultural archives, and a small number of survivors had been loaded onto these vessels. They were humanity's last, desperate bid for survival. But not everyone had escaped. The files made it clear that the evacuation had been incomplete. Millions, perhaps billions, were left behind. The scientist's final words echoed in Elias's mind, "We ran out of time." Elias leaned back, his mind reeling. The city's emptiness, the silence, the absence of life, it all made sense now. Humanity hadn't died slowly, it had been wiped out in a swift, calculated strike. And yet, the records gave him a glimmer of hope. The arcs were out there, somewhere in the void. Humanity wasn't entirely gone. Perhaps against all odds, there were survivors among the stars. But as the console's screen began to dim, another thought struck him. The monolith he had activated, was it connected to the invaders? Had he unwittingly drawn their attention back to Earth? The hum of the monolith seemed to echo faintly in his mind, a reminder that whatever had destroyed humanity might not be finished. He needed to move, to find a way off this dead planet, before the signal brought something back that he wasn't ready to face. With the weight of extinction on his shoulders, Elias left the ruins, determined to uncover the truth about humanity's fate and to find a way to carry its legacy forward. Elias continued his journey through the wasteland, his mind spinning with everything he had uncovered. The monolith's signal haunted him, a pulsing reminder that time was slipping away. Humanity's extinction had already been written into history. But something told him that the invaders were far from gone. If he didn't act quickly, whatever wiped out humanity might return, and this time, he would be the only one left to face it. As passed, or so it seemed. The sun, obscured by the sickly green haze in the sky, offered no sense of time. The landscape shifted from the crumbled city to barren plains littered with fractured remnants of human progress. Rusted towers and skeletal frames of forgotten machines rose like gravestones in the distance, their shapes grotesque against the alien sky. Then he saw it. Rising from the horizon was a structure unlike the others he'd seen, less decayed, more purposeful. Its spire was intact, its framework gleaming faintly under the strange light. As he drew closer, he recognized it as a spaceport. The sight sent a flicker of hope through him. If any remnants of humanity's technology were still operational, this might be his chance to escape Earth. The spaceport was vast, an immense facility once capable of launching vessels into the cosmos. Its architecture had withstood the centuries surprisingly well, though parts of it had collapsed under the weight of time. As Elias entered, he marveled at the sight of docking bays, hangars, and assembly lines frozen in time. The main hangar housed the real prize, a single spacecraft, seemingly intact. Its sleek design suggested it had been built during the final days of humanity's struggle. The hull was etched with the same insignia he'd seen in the cryo facility, a symbol of Earth's last-ditch efforts to survive. Elias approached cautiously, running his hand along the smooth, cold metal. The ship, though ancient, seemed preserved, as if it had been waiting for him. A ladder extended from the side, leading into the cockpit. He climbed aboard, his heart racing. Inside, the ship's control panel blinked faintly, its system still drawing power from a reserve source. He flipped a few switches, and the cabin hummed to life. The screens lit up, displaying diagnostics in a language he recognized: human technology. As he sifted through the ship's systems, he discovered something astonishing. The vessel wasn't just a ship, it was a beacon, part of a larger network designed to communicate with the arcs. Its purpose had been to guide the arcs back to Earth once it was deemed safe. But the signal had never been sent. The ship's log revealed why the beacon had been disabled deliberately. A message from the past, left by a dying engineer, appeared on the screen. "Do not activate the beacon. They are still out there, watching. If you call the arcs back, you'll doom what little of humanity remains." Elias froze. The warning was clear, but so was the dilemma. Humanity's survivors might still be out there, wandering the void, waiting for a signal to return. Without it, they would remain lost forever. Yet activating the beacon could bring the invaders back, unleashing destruction once more. He scoured the logs further and found a hidden file. It detailed the beacon's secondary function, an encrypted signal that could be sent directly to the arcs, bypassing detection by external forces. It was a slim chance, but it was better than nothing. Before he could act, a low vibration coursed through the air. The ship's sensors flared, displaying a warning, a disturbance in the upper atmosphere. Something was approaching Earth. Elias's stomach churned. The monolith's signal had been received. Whatever was out there had heard it and was coming back. His hands trembled as he prepared the beacon's transmission. He didn't have much time. If he could send the encrypted signal to the Arks, perhaps humanity's survivors would have a chance to regroup. But even as he worked, a gnawing fear grew in his chest. The invaders were already on their way, and Earth's final battle might not be over after all. The ship's engines roared to life as he initiated the launch sequence. If humanity had any hope of survival, it lay not in the ruins of Earth, but among the stars. Elias's path was clear. He had to finish what humanity started 1,000 years ago. The spacecraft's engines rumbled beneath Elias, their vibrations coursing through the metal frame as he prepared to launch. The beacon's controls glowed faintly, its encrypted signal ready to transmit to the Arks. Yet the message he was about to send felt like a double-edged sword, humanity's only hope for reunion and survival, but also a potential magnet for its destruction. Outside the cockpit window, the sky was changing. The sickly green haze that had hung over the planet began to distort, rippling as though reality itself were fraying. Elias couldn't see them yet, but he knew something was coming. The monolith's signal had worked, and now the invaders, silent architects of Earth's ruin, were returning. The ship's diagnostics chirped, signaling the launch sequence was ready. With a deep breath, Elias hit the ignition. The craft roared to life, its thrusters igniting and lifting it off the cracked, barren ground. The spaceport fell away beneath him as the ship climbed higher, the landscape shrinking into a desolate patchwork of ruins and emptiness. As the ship ascended through the atmosphere, Elias turned his attention to the beacon. He entered the final sequence to transmit the encrypted signal. It would reach the Arks, wherever they were, bypassing traditional frequencies that the invaders might intercept. The system confirmed the message's transmission. For a fleeting moment, Elias felt hope, a fragile, flickering thing that his actions might guide humanity's remnants back home. But that hope was short-lived. Alarms blared as the ship's sensors picked up multiple contacts. They were massive, descending through the upper atmosphere with unnatural precision. Elias looked out the viewport and saw them, dark, angular ships that blotted out the faint light of the sun. They were larger than anything he'd imagined, their forms sleek and predatory, like beasts stalking a wounded prey. The invaders had returned. Elias's fingers flew across the controls, activating the ship's limited defensive systems. A targeting interface flickered to life, showing the alien vessels closing in on his position. They were fast, far faster than he'd anticipated. Their weapons systems began to glow, charging with energy that radiated with ominous intensity. The first shot came without warning, a beam of light slicing through the void. Elias banked hard, the ship's automated system screaming as he narrowly avoided the blast. Another shot followed, then another, each one closer than the last. The invaders weren't just trying to destroy him, they were hurting him, pushing him toward the planet's orbit where escape would be impossible. Panic surged, but Elias forced himself to focus. The beacon's transmission was still active, the signal reaching farther and farther into the depths of space. If the Arks received it, there was still a chance. He just had to stay alive long enough for the message to complete. The ship shuddered violently as one of the alien beams grazed its hull. Warning lights flashed, and the cockpit filled with the acrid smell of burning circuitry. Elias rerouted power to the thrusters, pushing the ship into a desperate climb. As he breached the planet's atmosphere, the true scale of the threat became clear. Dozens of alien ships hovered in orbit, their forms casting long shadows over the Earth below. These weren't just scouts, they were an armada. The invaders had come to finish what they started, and Elias was the only obstacle in their path. His ship's AI chirped, alerting him to an anomaly. A single signal, faint but distinct, was emanating from deep space. It wasn't the invaders, it was human. The Arks. The encrypted signal had been received. Elias's heart surged with relief, but it was short-lived. The invaders had detected the transmission, their ships shifting formation to block the signal's path. They were adapting, reacting, determined to prevent humanity's survivors from returning. Desperation fueled Elias's next move. He pushed the ship's engines to their limit, weaving through the alien vessels as they fired relentlessly. Each near miss sent shockwaves through the hull, but he refused to stop. The Arks needed time to respond, time to prepare, time to save what was left of the human race. As the alien ships closed in, Elias made a fateful decision. He activated the ship's final failsafe, a self-destruct mechanism tied to an experimental EMP. If he could detonate it in the heart of the alien fleet, it might disable their systems long enough for the signal to escape unimpeded. The countdown began, a cold, mechanical voice ticking away the seconds. Elias guided the ship toward the largest cluster of alien vessels, his hand steady despite the chaos around him. He didn't know if the EMP would work, or if the Arks would even make it back, but he had to try. The ship's hull groaned under the strain as he approached the fleet, the alien ships converging on his position. The timer reached its final moments, and Elias closed his eyes. Humanity will endure, he thought, as the ship erupted in a blinding pulse of light. The explosion was unlike anything the void of space had ever witnessed. A burst of searing light radiated outward, a cascading wave of energy that rippled across the alien fleet. The EMP device at the heart of Elias's ship detonated with brutal precision, sending a surge of electromagnetic force that crippled the sleek, ominous vessels. For a moment, silence reigned. The alien ships, once predatory and unstoppable, hung motionless in the void. Their angular forms, so intimidating moments ago, were now inert, their weapons dim and engines lifeless. The blast had done its job, rendering the invaders temporarily powerless. But Elias was gone. The ship that had carried him through the ruins of Earth, the beacon of hope he'd clung to, and the man himself had all been consumed in the explosion. Yet, in his sacrifice, the encrypted signal had slipped past the blockade, racing across the stars toward the Arks. Far away, in the cold reaches of space, the survivors of humanity stirred. The Arks had been drifting for centuries, their occupants suspended in cryosleep as automated systems searched for signs of a safe return. When Elias's signal reached them, it triggered an awakening. Within the Arks, systems long dormant sprang to life. Lights flickered on, engines hummed, and pods of frozen survivors began to thaw. Humans, preserved through 1,000 years of exile, opened their eyes to the faint glow of hope. The signal carried more than just coordinates, it carried Elias's final act of defiance, his determination to see humanity endure. Back on Earth, the alien ships began to recover. The EMP's effects were temporary, their systems rebooting as their advanced technology overcame the disruption. The stillness of their fleet gave way to activity, their sleek forms shifting as they realigned their focus. But something had changed. The detonation had not only crippled their fleet but also exposed them. Hidden in the radiation of the blast was a pattern data embedded within the EMP's energy signature. It was subtle, but it had been enough to illuminate vulnerabilities in the alien technology. The Arks, now fully operational, received this information alongside Elias's signal. For the first time, humanity had a chance to fight back. In the months that followed, the Arks began their return. Each vessel carried not just survivors, but knowledge data stored from Earth's final days, technological advancements, and the fragments of hope Elias had uncovered in his journey. The survivors were no longer running, they were coming home. The alien fleet, though formidable, was not invincible. Humanity's ingenuity, combined with the new insights gained from Elias's actions, gave them the tools to adapt and resist. When the first Ark entered Earth's orbit, it was greeted by a sight both haunting and awe-inspiring. The planet, scarred and broken, hung against the backdrop of stars. The alien fleet loomed, but the humans aboard the Ark felt no fear. They had returned not as victims, but as a species reborn. Elias's sacrifice had bought them time, and time was all they needed. Humanity's greatest strength had always been its resilience, its ability to rise from the ashes of destruction. As the Arks descended toward the planet, the invaders began to stir, their ships aligning in preparation for a final confrontation. But this time, the outcome would be different. The humans had returned, and this time they weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for their legacy, for their home, and for the future Elias had believed in. Above the ruined earth, amidst the gathering storm of conflict, a new dawn began to break. Humanity had endured the darkness, and now it was ready to reclaim the light. Thank you for watching Starlight Sci-Fi. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, keep dreaming of the stars.